Hey guys, tonight we're going to lie very still, tucked somewhere between myth and medicine, as we drift back to a time when getting a fever might mean your liver was too hot, your blood too choleric, or that Mars was simply in a bad mood. Welcome to the medieval body, where the balance of your insides supposedly dictated not just your health, but your personality, your fate, and sometimes how long you'd be stuck wearing leeches on your neck. You find yourself in a stone room. It smells of beeswax and rosemary, and you're lying on a firm straw mattress with a woolen coverlet. You're not ill yet. But in this world, you don't have to be sick for a physician to poke you, prod you, or dramatically hold a vial of your urine up to the window, like he's about to toast to your demise. You blink, and outside the narrow window, the sky is pale and heavy with fog. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something oddly comforting about knowing we're all drifting off under different stars. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin with the humors, the foundation of medieval medicine. There are 4 of them swirling invisibly inside you: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. No one's ever seen them all together, of course, but that doesn't matter. Everyone agrees they're real, just like gravity or your neighbor's bad attitude. They're inherited from ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen, and by the time the Middle Ages roll in, they're firmly lodged in every doctor's head, like a song that won't stop playing. If you're too cheerful, they say you have too much blood, you're sanguine. If you're gloomy, it's too much black bile, you're melancholic. If you're angry, yellow bile. If you're sluggish and overly moist, yes, moist, blame phlegm. And so the body becomes a battlefield of fluids. Your doctor arrives in a long robe holding a wooden box of mysterious vials. He insists he's not just a healer, but a balancer. He doesn't really want to know what hurts. He wants to know which fluid is running amok. You're not you. You're a walking soup. And someone forgot the salt. Mainstream fact. This theory of the 4 humors dominated European medical thinking from the Roman Empire through the Renaissance, lasting well over 1,000 years. Entire careers were built on balancing these fluids through food environment and truly alarming therapies. He asks what you've been eating. You say bread and goat cheese. He tuts. Ah, yes, he says, scribbling with a goose quill. Too much heat. Too dry. You don't know what that means, but you nod anyway. Then he checks your pulse. Not to time it, of course. He doesn't own a clock. No, he's feeling for tension, for qualities. He decides it's too soft, too slow. Cold, he murmurs. You are cold. You offer to get a blanket. He frowns. There are charts for this. Charts with grids listing foods, elements, organs, seasons, planets, and humors. Summer is hot and dry, perfect for yellow bile. Winter cold and wet phlegm's domain. Even emotions get labeled. Joy is warm and moist. Fear, cold and dry. You begin to think this is less medicine and more a weather report for your soul. One fringe theory you overhear in the apothecary is that sneezing violently resets the humors. Another guy claims dreams are just your humors performing shadow plays inside your head. He's either very wise or very drunk, possibly both. The doctor, now satisfied with your pulse, prescribes a diet of boiled lettuce, a cool room, and no loud music. You didn't even know there was loud music in the 1300s. The drums, he whispers ominously, they disturb the bile. You're given a pouch of dried herbs to steep in goat's milk and a small glass vial of something unidentifiable that smells like roasted onions and despair. The label just reads, "To cool the fire within." You decide to hide it under your bed. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians genuinely believed in the physical presence of humors, or if the system was more metaphorical, a way of making sense of the confusing and uncontrollable nature of health and emotion. But to you, lying here in this candlelit room with a damp cloth on your forehead, it feels strangely logical, because even now, as the wind rattles the shutters and your thoughts drift toward sleep, you can't deny that some days do feel wetter, some moods do feel hotter. Maybe the ancient physicians weren't entirely wrong, just incredibly confident about things they couldn't prove. You're almost asleep now. The candle has burned low, casting your shadow into soft, stretched shapes across the floor. And in this quiet moment, your four little humors, real or not, seem perfectly at peace. You wake to the sound of someone muttering about your eyebrows, specifically their thickness and curve. It seems the village physician has returned and is now staring intently at your face as if it holds the secrets of your soul. You haven't had breakfast. You haven't even spoken yet. But according to him, your skin alone is telling a tale, and spoiler alert, it's not a happy one. You've got a bilious complexion, he says gravely. You blink. Too much yellow bile, he clarifies helpfully. It's rising into your cheeks. You touch your cheek out of instinct. It feels like skin. But he's already moved on gently, lifting your eyelid with a thumb. Sallow under-eye tint. Liver distress, possibly a result of eating onions under Mars. He doesn't explain what Mars has to do with it, but you're not in a position to argue. In the Middle Ages, your face is a map, a blotch on your temple. Something wrong with your gallbladder, greasy skin, your stomach's being lazy, acne, could be sin, could be sex, could be Saturn. Either way, your body is a canvas, and every spot and crease is screaming in Latin. The belief in physiognomy, that your facial features reflect your internal state, runs deep, deep enough that some physicians keep hand-painted manuals illustrating what healthy eyes, noses, and even ears should look like. These books look suspiciously like art student doodles. Still, they're treated like gospel. Your physician gently traces the line of your jaw, firm but cold. You're melancholic today. Mainstream fact. Medieval diagnostic practice often relied heavily on appearance. A pale face, trembling hands, even the way you walked all were interpreted through the lens of humoral imbalance. Without stethoscopes, thermometers, or microscopes, doctors used what they had: eyes, hands, and wildly speculative confidence. He opens your mouth. Say, "Ah," he commands. You do a bit uncertainly. He leans close enough to make you nervous, then announces, "Coated tongue. Spleen involved. Possibly worms." You close your mouth. He pulls out a small brass mirror and holds it up. Do you see that freckle above your lip? You do. He nods, sagely, heart strained. You must be careful. Avoid dancing. You hadn't planned on dancing, but now it's off the table entirely. Outside, the village square is buzzing. People bustle past, muttering about the baker's rash and whether it means he's cursed or just eaten too many dried plums. A woman with a violet shawl stops you. She looks concerned. "Your eyes are set too close today," she whispers. "Have you sinned?" You assure her you've only sinned a little. She gives you a dried rosemary sprig and scurries off. There's a fringe belief gaining popularity in town. A traveling healer insists that moles, yes, those little dark spots, reveal not only your health, but your destiny. A mole near your left eye means heartbreak. One on your neck, trouble with your lungs, or maybe your inheritance. A man with 4 moles on his back claims he's been cursed by Venus. He now refuses to sleep lying down. "Don't want the bile to pool," he says, solemn as a monk. Meanwhile, a young apothecary girl draws diagrams connecting face parts to organs, nose to heart, chin to kidneys. She's surprisingly accurate, mostly because she eavesdrops on every diagnosis and takes better notes than the actual physicians. You return home and study your reflection in a pot of water. Your skin's a bit pink. Does that mean your blood is winning? Or is it bile bubbling under your pores? There are no clear answers, but according to your physician, there never are. You must be observed, he declares at your next appointment, arranging you in sunlight like a potted plant. The skin speaks before the mouth does. He applies a poultice to your cheeks, something involving crushed parsley ashes and moon-cooled milk. It smells like regret and barnyard. He steps back and folds his arms. "Let's see if that shuts the liver up." You sincerely hope it does. Historians still debate whether medieval facial diagnosis was purely medical, or if it bled into superstition and personality judgment. Some scholars argue it was never meant to be scientific. It was just a way for doctors to sound like they knew what they were doing. Others believe it was deadly serious, especially in court cases where someone's face might be used as evidence of lying or lustfulness. You suspect it was both, part diagnosis, part social performance, and mostly guesswork. There's a priest in town who insists faces are the windows to the soul. He refuses to treat anyone with a crooked nose, says it's divine punishment for envy. You've never heard of such a sin-specific nostril issue, but he's persuasive. Meanwhile, the town sculptor has begun carving saints with unusually symmetrical faces on purpose to promote healing, he claims. More likely, he just likes working with neat angles. One night you dream your nose grows longer every time you lie about your liver. In the dream, it turns green and points toward the sky. You wake up in a cold sweat. The physician later confirms this means your spleen is offended. You apologize to it. He approves. Eventually, your face begins to clear. Not because of parsley paste, but probably because you've been drinking clean water and avoiding that mysterious onion vial. The physician is pleased. You've turned the tide, he says proudly. The cheeks are flushing in harmony. You look in the mirror again. Same you, but maybe a little more peaceful. Maybe it isn't the freckles or the redness or the shape of your chin that matters, but the way you see yourself when no one's diagnosing you. Still, just in case you book another appointment, you've heard he's testing a new method, listening to your ears for gallbladder complaints. Can't hurt, right? Unless it involves more goat milk. You've been sneezing a lot lately. A dry little cough has crept in too. Nothing serious, at least by your standards. But in the Middle Ages, that's enough to make people start inching away from you at the marketplace and crossing themselves 3 times as you pass. Because here, sickness is more than just physical, it's spiritual. And you, dear listener, might be more than sick. You might be sinful. You don't remember doing anything especially terrible. Maybe you took a second honey tart when no one was looking. Maybe you rolled your eyes at Brother Giles during prayer. Either way, your symptoms now suggest divine disappointment. The village friar says your cough is clearly the result of inner rot caused by pride. You wonder if pride has a smell. He says, yes, burnt feathers and old coins. This belief that illness is punishment from God isn't fringe thinking here. It's the dominant framework. Get a headache. God's tapping your skull like a wine barrel warning you. Break a bone. That's because you broke the Sabbath. Digestive trouble. Probably a metaphor for moral constipation. You don't just treat the body. You confess, you repent. You promise to eat fewer figs and stop envying your neighbor's oxen. Mainstream historical fact. Throughout much of the medieval era, the church's worldview dominated medicine. Disease was widely seen as a consequence of sin, either personal or communal. This wasn't abstract. It was preached from pulpits, written into sermons, and baked into the structure of hospitals, which were often run by monks. Your local healer insists on starting every treatment with a prayer, not a quiet one either, a loud, dramatic one full of Latin and references to saints you've never heard of. You lie there while he waves incense over your feet. These, he mutters, have walked paths of temptation. You think of that one shortcut through the orchard and wince. Of course, the more powerful the illness, the bigger the sin. A rash on your arm, maybe a lie. Boils, probably lust. Plague. Well, that's either full-scale moral collapse or the apocalypse. Sometimes both. And don't even think about recovering quickly. If you bounce back too fast, people get suspicious. They'll assume you've cut a deal with something unholy, a slow, painful recovery, much more socially acceptable. It means you're being purified. Fringe tidbit. Some people in extreme religious sects would actually seek out sickness to prove their devotion. They'd expose themselves to the ill sleep on stone floors or refuse all comfort, believing that suffering brought them closer to God. One man supposedly poured vinegar into his own ears to purge prideful thoughts. He was deaf for life. The church was not impressed. You've been told to visit the local shrine. The priest says St. Erasmus might intercede on your behalf. He's very good with stomach issues. You walk there barefoot in the rain because that's supposed to show humility. Along the way, you step on 3 thorns and 1 suspiciously slimy frog. You're not feeling more holy, just soggy. At the shrine, a woman is weeping loudly beside a wax statue. She swears her son was cured of nosebleeds after lighting a candle here. They were unholy nosebleeds, she explains, from anger. You light a candle. Your nose remains the same. You return home and sneeze again. The baker's wife immediately turns her cloak inside out and mutters a protective charm under her breath. You consider doing the same, but all you have is a turnip. So you sneeze into that. The physician arrives uninvited as usual. He's brought a list of possible sins that might be connected to chronic throat disruption. Sloth, envy, and unexamined gluttony are the top contenders. You confess to having eaten some roasted chestnuts in bed last night. He nods. Ah, a midnight sin. That'll do it. He prescribes prayer fasting and boiled mint leaves with holy water. He also recommends avoiding mirrors for 3 days. Too much vanity, he warns, can clog the soul. You ask if washing helps. He frowns. With holy water, yes. With soap, debatable. Historians still argue whether people really believed all illnesses were divine punishment, or if this was just what the clergy said while secretly relying on herbalists and trial and error. Some evidence shows that many people held 2 thoughts at once. Yes, illness was punishment, but also, yes, maybe leeches could help. Dual logic. Divine and earthy. Sacred and suspiciously sticky. You start keeping a sin log. Every night you write down the worst thing you did, complained about cold stew, imagined stealing a plum, daydreamed during Mass. You wonder if your cough will ease once you hit confession-level honesty. It doesn't. But you feel lighter. Or maybe that's just the fasting. A friend brings you a relic, a tiny splinter of wood that supposedly came from St. Basil's walking stick. You're instructed to tie it to your ankle with red thread and recite a psalm. You do it. Nothing happens. Later, you realize it wasn't wood. It was a piece of old broomstick, but you keep wearing it, just in case. One night, while lying under scratchy blankets, you ask aloud, if my illness is punishment, what exactly did I do wrong? A small voice in your head replies, you existed. You laugh softly. It echoes strangely in the rafters. You recover, eventually. Not dramatically, not miraculously, just slowly like a cat stretching into sunlight. No one cheers, no one throws a feast. But the village nods quietly, relieved that you didn't die of your own arrogance. The friar comes by. He presses a dried flower into your hand. A reminder, he says, to live more gently. You nod. Then he adds, also stop eating after sunset. The stomach resents it. You promise. You probably won't. But for now your soul is light. Your cough is gone. And your sins, whatever they were, are silent. You're feeling better now. Mostly. The cough is gone, the wheezing has faded, and your complexion no longer frightens small children. But your physician is still worried. Not about your health this time, about your urine. Yes, your pee. Because here in the Middle Ages, urine is everything. It's the crystal ball of the human body, the favorite diagnostic tool of every halfway respectable doctor, from London to Constantinople. It's not gross. It's divine. Liquid gold, the holy grail of diagnostics. And now you are being asked to provide a sample. The physician presents a flask the size of a pigeon egg, bulbous at the bottom, narrow at the neck, made of clear glass. He refers to it as your medulla and insists you collect your urine at the second void of the morning, ideally after a light meal and no impure thoughts. You hand him the warm sample. He holds it up to the light like a jeweler inspecting a sapphire. Tilts it, swirls it, hums, then begins to describe its qualities as though he's reviewing wine. Golden, faintly cloudy, moderate foam, floating bubbles, very choleric. Liver's putting on a show again. You wonder whether he's about to sip it. He does not, but he looks like he might. Mainstream historical fact. Uroscopy, the examination of urine, was a major pillar of medieval medicine. Doctors categorized samples based on over 20 criteria, including color, clarity, sediment, bubbles, smell, and even how the urine moved in the flask. Medical charts depicted up to 20 distinct shades, each connected to different illnesses and humoral imbalances. You're shown a parchment illustration, 20 flasks painted in gentle watercolor hues, straw rust, deep amber, greenish fog, milky peach. It's like a medieval Pantone chart for human suffering. Your current color, marsh duck, yellow. The physician looks somber. He brings out a chart. On one side, colors and textures. On the other, diagnoses. Dark red fever, pale and clear, cold stomach, milky kidney rot, frothy gas in the brain, sweet-smelling sin. Apparently, sin has a scent too. You ask what plain yellow means. Unresolved emotional turmoil, he replies without blinking. Your sample has settled. He peers again. Sediment, grainy. That suggests grief. You think about your goat that wandered off 2 years ago. You have missed her. Perhaps your bladder still mourns her absence. You ask if this method is really reliable. He frowns. Would the Pope approve it if it weren't? You're not convinced that's how science works, but then again, this isn't science, it's bodily theology. Fringe tidbit, some urine. Prophets claim they can tell your future from a sample, not just your health, but your marriage prospects, your success in trade, even whether you'll die during Lent. These men travel with velvet-lined flasks and charge extra if you're royalty. One infamous prophet allegedly predicted a duke's death based on the scent of fermented asparagus. That duke lived another decade, but developed severe trust issues. Meanwhile, in your village, uroscopy has become the hot topic. Housewives whisper about their husband's colors. One woman claims she cured her back pain by switching her chamber pot to oak wood. Another swears her toddler's tantrums stopped after she bathed his feet in corrective broth. The apothecary is now selling urine harmonizers herbs steeped in rabbit milk and moonlight. They don't do anything, but they smell soothingly herbal, and that's half the battle. Back at your bedside, the physician prepares a written report. You're flattered until you realize it's just a one-sentence verdict. Moderate imbalance of bile with rising phlegm. Prognosis, fair. Personality, volatile. You ask what treatment he suggests. Warm stones on the kidneys. Lentils, boiled in fennel. Avoid figs. You sigh. Always the figs. He adds, also, no singing for a fortnight. It agitates the spleen. You weren't planning to sing, but now you're deeply tempted. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors actually believed in the predictive powers of urine, or if it was simply the only thing they could measure with any consistency. After all, no x-rays, no blood panels, no stethoscopes, just you, a matula, and a flickering candle. One theory suggests the ceremony of uroscopy was more about reassuring the patient, a ritual of seriousness. Look how much I care. Look how carefully I observe. Look how many Latin words I can use about your pee. And maybe, in a time when so much was uncertain, ceremony counted for something. The physician hands back your now cold flask. Dispose of it under moonlight, he says, in running water if possible. You ask why. To release the trapped heat, he whispers, as if revealing a secret from the stars. You tip it into the stream behind your cottage. It glows briefly in the moonlight, like it understands the ritual too. You almost feel better. One final thought he offers, to make a tonic using the same principles. It'll include goat bone dust, barley flour, and the tears of someone younger than you. Fresh tears, only he warns. You politely decline. Your dreams that night are vivid. You're floating in a sea of glowing flasks, each one containing a miniature version of yourself, swimming in circles, waving. Some of them wave happily. One of them just shrugs. You wake with the quiet certainty that something inside you has shifted. And your next urine sample, a perfect shade of calm golden, or, as the physician calls it, serenity in liquid form. You're sitting on a wooden stool, sleeves rolled up, wondering if the physician's hands are actually clean. He's rummaging through a sack that contains, unfortunately, leeches. Yes, leeches. You knew this moment would come. It was only a matter of time before someone decided the best way to restore your health was to let the bad blood out. You don't scream, not outwardly, but your spleen might. Bloodletting is all the rage now. Everyone's doing it. Nobles, monks, milkmaids, even goats on special feast days. But that's more of a culinary thing. The logic, your body is a stew of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If one gets too bold, say blood, you have to drain the excess, gently, through the skin, with a knife. Or with these hungry little fellows now squirming in a bowl beside your elbow. Mainstream historical fact. Bloodletting was one of the most common medical procedures for over 1,000 years. From Galen in ancient Rome to surgeons in Elizabethan England, the belief held firm imbalance caused illness, and nothing rebalanced quite like letting out a pint or two of your life force. The physician finally selects his favorite leech. He names it Gregory. You don't ask why. Gregory is placed on the soft underside of your forearm. He latches on with a disturbing amount of confidence. Good boy, the doctor murmurs as if Gregory just fetched a slipper. You feel a tingling sensation, then a dull pull, like a tiny vacuum is sucking your health through a straw. The physician hums while watching. He seems oddly cheerful. You've got lively blood, he says. That's good or bad. Depends on the season. You ask how much blood will be taken. He shrugs. We'll stop when your complexion looks calmer. You don't know what that means, but you're getting paler by the minute. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval texts claim that blood has moods. Spring blood is cheerful. Autumn blood is depressed. Wednesday, blood is mischievous. There are entire calendars advising when to bleed based on planetary alignments. One chart says you should never bleed from the left arm during a waning moon unless you wish to offend Mercury. No one wants that. Another manual warns against bloodletting on Fridays as it may invite demonic influence. You check the date. It's Friday. Gregory continues to sip. In some monasteries, monks are bled monthly, whether they're sick or not. It's seen as a spiritual cleansing, a way to mimic Christ's suffering, minus the nails, thankfully. Some monks even look forward to it. Thins the soul, one brother tells you, and the thighs. Not all physicians use leeches. Some prefer knives, glass cups, or hollow bird bones sharpened into tubes. One barber in a nearby town uses a silver blade dipped in garlic wine. He claims it makes the blood more cooperative. You're starting to feel lightheaded. This is expected. In fact, the dizziness is often celebrated. That means the heat is leaving your head, the doctor says. Too much brain warmth leads to arrogance. You don't feel particularly arrogant. You feel like you might fall off the stool. He offers you a fig. You decline. Historians still argue how effective bloodletting actually was. Some believe the occasional small bleed may have reduced blood pressure or helped with specific conditions like polycythemia. But more often, The results were, let's say, dramatic in a bad way. People bled to weakness, to unconsciousness, and sometimes to death. There's a famous case of a French prince who was bled 4 times in one day for a sore throat. He died. His physician was reportedly confused. "I didn't even get to the ankle veins yet," he said mournfully. After 10 minutes, Gregory is fat, really fat. He drops off your arm with a squelch and slithers lazily back into his bowl. He's done his duty. You, on the other hand, look like a very tired ghost. The physician wraps your arm with a cloth soaked in vinegar and thyme. To keep the humors respectful, he explains. You ask if the treatment worked. He studies your eyelids. They droop nicely. That's promising. At home, you rest in bed sipping weak broth and watching the fire flicker. You do feel calmer, or maybe just drained. People stop by to ask how your bleeding went. One woman says you look younger. Another hands you a bouquet of clover, just in case your soul tried to leak out with the blood. You thank her and hide the flowers in your chamber pot. The next morning, the physician returns with a bleeding chart. It shows the human body with labeled vein points, temples, elbows, knees, ankles behind the ears, each connected to a specific emotion or sin. You've got grief in your foot, he says. We'll let that out next week. You make a note to hide your feet. Before leaving, he offers Gregory a gentle pat. Best in the district, he whispers. You're not sure who he's talking to, Gregory or you. You lie back down, dizzy, but oddly peaceful. Your dreams are simple that night. Just a field, a breeze, and a leech floating gently on a lily pad, humming an old monk's song. You're still recovering from the bloodletting. Your head feels lighter, your arms feel floaty, and you're vaguely convinced your dreams have a soundtrack now, probably Gregorian chant, with a side of ominous dripping. But the physician insists the next phase of healing is just as important. It's time for a poultice. Yes, a warm, fragrant, mysterious blob of plants, bread oils, and occasionally questionable animal bits that will be gently but firmly smeared on your body. Because what you really need clearly is to be part of a medieval sandwich. The physician arrives with a clay bowl and the confident look of someone who believes mustard can cure heartbreak. He stirs the mixture theatrically. It's thick green, steaming slightly, and smells like your grandmother's garden during a thunderstorm if someone had spilled beer on it. Comfrey crushed snails, marjoram, a hint of goat butter, he declares. This one's for your lungs. You didn't know your lungs needed butter. Mainstream historical fact. Poultices were a cornerstone of medieval external medicine, used for swelling infection, bruises, chest pain, fevers, you name it. The logic was simple. Pull out the badness, push in the healing. A good poultice should be warm, wet, and weird. It should smell like something you'd never eat, but might trust with your life. This one is wrapped in a piece of linen soaked in vinegar, then placed gently on your chest. The physician hums a tune as he presses it in place. Don't breathe too deeply, he warns. You'll anger the marjoram. You lie back, arms stiff at your sides, and wonder if this is what a lasagna feels like before baking. There's a faint tingling, then a warmth, then something that might be itching, or might just be your imagination doing jazz hands. The physician nods solemnly. That's the snail working. You do not ask how the snail knows where your lungs are. Fringe tidbit. Some poultices use dried mouse skin for burns or roasted pigeon for stomach ailments. One infamous 14th century remedy recommended a paste made of spider webs, rose petals, and ox gall applied directly to the navel to dispel melancholy. There are even accounts of urine-based poultices, often from donkeys, used to cure leg ulcers. This particular remedy was banned in one monastery after a monk became too enthusiastic about sourcing ingredients. You're told to remain still for an hour while the poultice draws out the heat. You comply, though you start to worry that the smell may be permanent, somewhere between damp grass and fear. The physician, meanwhile, is preparing another bowl, this one for your feet. Your humors tend to sink overnight, he explains. We must lift them back toward the heart. You glance at your feet. They look innocent. He disagrees. The new poultice includes ground barley lard and powdered lavender. It's spread thick across your soles, then wrapped in clean wool and tied with twine. You're now officially swaddled from toe to collarbone in organic mystery stew. Your neighbor stops by to deliver a gift and catches sight of you. She nods politely and says, "You look balanced." You're unsure whether that's a compliment or a warning. Historians still argue whether poultices genuinely worked or were simply a ritual of care, a placebo wrapped in herbs. Some ingredients had antimicrobial or anti-inflammatory properties, like garlic or honey. Others, not so much. But the act of heating, applying, wrapping, and waiting created a kind of intimacy between healer and patient, between body and earth. And in a world without antibiotics, sometimes belief was the most powerful ingredient. You start to sweat under the chest wrap. The physician sees this and beams. A purge, he declares. Your humors are leaving via perspiration. You ask if that's why you feel itchy. Possibly, he says, or it's the goat butter. Either way, he refuses to remove it for another half hour. He insists that the snail has more to say. You drift into a nap, dreaming of being smothered by a very enthusiastic salad. You wake when the poultices are finally peeled off, warm, soggy, a little clingy. The physician sniffs them like a wine critic. Ah, this one absorbed sorrow, he murmurs. You weren't aware you had sorrow in your ankles. He wipes your skin with vinegar water and gives you a final inspection. Better hue, he says. Less doom in your complexion. He packs up his bowls, hums a farewell tune, and promises to return next week with a cooling compress for your thoughts. You lie there, vaguely sticky, vaguely holy, and surprisingly tired. Your dog refuses to come near you for the rest of the evening. You can't blame her. That night, as you settle under a clean blanket and listen to the rain tap on your shutters, you realize something strange. You do feel better. Maybe it was the herbs. Maybe it was the hour of stillness. Or maybe the snail really knew what it was doing. You awaken to a new sound. It's not birdsong or bells or the rustling of monks sweeping the cobblestones outside the chapel. It's chanting. Low, rhythmic, oddly hypnotic chanting, drifting in from somewhere near the edge of town. You shuffle to the window, still slightly sticky from last night's poultices, and peer through the misted glass. There they are. A slow-moving procession, heads bowed, black robes sweeping the mud, and every few steps a sudden loud crack as one of them whips his own back. Ah, flagellants, because what your day needed clearly was a band of wandering penitents beating themselves in public to chase away the plague. Mainstream historical fact: during outbreaks of disease, especially the Black Death, flagellant movements swept across Europe. Believers gathered in groups and marched barefoot from town to town, performing acts of self-punishment. They whipped themselves, sang hymns of sorrow, and begged God for forgiveness, not just for their sins, but for the world's. To them, sickness wasn't just biological, it was moral decay made visible. And they weren't wrong exactly, just off by a few microbes. You go outside and watch from a respectful distance. The leader carries a heavy wooden cross, his back striped with half-healed wounds. He chants in Latin words you mostly don't understand, except for miserere nobis. Have mercy on us. They stop in front of the well. One man drops to his knees and begins to recite a litany of towns recently ravaged by plague. You hear familiar names. You also hear names of towns that never existed. One is just called Sorrow Hill, another Goat End. You assume this is symbolic. Fringe tidbit. Some flagellants wore leather masks with red-painted tears running down the cheeks. Others embedded iron crosses into their robes, sewn directly over the spine to increase the pain when whipped. One group in Bohemia traveled with a goat they called Brother Grief, who they believed absorbed sins through eye contact. Brother Grief eventually escaped into the woods. He is now presumably living his best life. You ask your physician what to make of this display. He sighs. It's not medicine, but it's effective. You raise an eyebrow. Not for healing bodies, he clarifies, but it moves fear around, and that's something. He then excuses himself to collect rainwater for an eye salve. The flagellants finish their chant and resume walking. Some towns welcome them. Others forbid their entry. They've been blamed for inciting panic, spreading false doctrine, even stirring violence against certain groups. Your village, ever polite, simply ignores them. One child tries to follow the procession. Her mother yanks her back and hands her a spoonful of boiled turnip as punishment. Later that day, the flagellants are gone. but their energy lingers like a sermon that won't leave your ears. You feel vaguely guilty for things you haven't done, and suddenly hyper-aware of the fragility of your breath. You mention this to your neighbor. She hands you a candle and says, "Sit in the root cellar, it'll pass." You don't question her advice. You sit there for an hour surrounded by potatoes, humming softly. It helps. Historians still argue whether the flagellant movements were truly grassroots or manipulated by political and religious powers. Some believe they were used to redirect public rage, turning panic into self-blame instead of rebellion. Others say the flagellants simply reflected a universal need to do something when the world turns dark. Either way, they vanished as suddenly as they appeared, banned, disbanded, and quietly folded back into the folds of history. You dream that night of walking in the procession. Your robe is velvet, your whip made of daisies. Instead of chanting, you hum a lullaby. In the dream, people don't suffer, they just walk slowly, quietly, together. You wake before the dream ends, but you carry the rhythm with you all day. It makes your steps feel softer, your breathing steadier. And when you pass the empty road where the flagellants walked, you place a flower on the ground, just in case they circle back. It's been a strange week. Already, leeches, poultices, whip-happy pilgrims, and now you find yourself staring at the night sky, transfixed by a bright glowing streak across the darkness. You squint. It doesn't move. It just hangs there, long and shimmering, like someone scratched the sky with a glowing fingernail. It's a comet, and unfortunately for you and everyone in your village, that means something bad is definitely about to happen. Because in the Middle Ages, when comets appeared, people lost their minds. Mainstream historical fact. Comets were widely feared in medieval Europe. They were considered harbingers of death, famine, war, or the fall of kings. Monks chronicled their appearances with all the subtlety of a horror novel, flaming swords in the sky, or bearded stars vomiting fire. These weren't just celestial bodies. These were cosmic threats sent by a furious god, or worse, a curious devil. You overhear your neighbor praying in Latin French, and something that might be old goat. Another woman throws salt over her shoulder, weeping. A shepherd tries to warn the sheep, who predictably do not care. The village priest rings the church bell without pause until someone begs him to stop. "It's already here," they shout. "The bell won't chase it off." But he keeps ringing, just in case. Fringe tidbit. Some believed that comets were dragon's breath, or the tail of Satan himself dragging across the firmament. Others thought they were frozen vapors from hell that had somehow floated too high. One monk in 1147 declared that a comet over his abbey caused all the bread to turn green and the wine to taste like old feet. He was not believed, but also not entirely wrong. Your local physician offers a different explanation. "Excess wind," he says. You pause. "In the air," he adds, as if that helps. He explains that the comet is probably a buildup of atmospheric vapors. When hot air and cold air fight the sky, burps, he concludes. You ask what you should do. He recommends a mild purge and a diet of boiled onions. You respectfully decline. Historians still argue whether the medieval fear of comets was spontaneous or reinforced by elites. Some scholars think kings and clergy used comet appearances to justify wars, executions, or tax hikes. The comet foretells unrest, they'd say. Give us your grain. Others believe the fear was organic, a natural human response to a mysterious light streaking across a sky they couldn't explain. After all, comets didn't follow the rules. Stars were fixed, planets wandered in loops. But comets, they came out of nowhere and vanished just as suddenly. No wonder people thought they meant something. You return home and cover your windows with herbs. Your neighbor gives you a sprig of verbena and a small pouch of dried mouse teeth for protection. The sky burns brighter now. People stop going outside. Children are kept indoors. Markets thin out. Bread becomes scarce. And then just as suddenly the comet is gone. No explosion, no fire, no angels, just gone. The priest declares that the town's virtue has been rewarded. The physician says the air has cleared. A boy says he saw the comet land in a lake, and now the fish glow. No one believes him, but people go back outside anyway. You dream that night of floating, not falling, just hovering in a black sky with a long tail of light stretching behind you. It's peaceful up there. No plagues, no fear, just cold air and stars that don't judge you. In the morning, the streets smell of new bread and someone's burnt soup. Life continues awkwardly. You find yourself checking the sky every evening just to be sure. Nothing appears. Not yet. But you tuck the mouse teeth under your pillow anyway, just in case. You sit on a wooden bench in the town square, watching a traveling healer unpack her wares. She's old, with the posture of someone who's carried too many herbs and too many secrets. Her cart is bursting with bundles of dried leaves, little vials, powders, wrapped in parchment, and something that might be a fox's tail, but also might be a broom. It's best not to ask. A small crowd gathers. Someone has a cough. Someone else has a suspicious swelling behind their ear. But most people have just come to see what miracle or madness she'll offer today. Because in the medieval world, medicine doesn't always come from a university-trained physician with Latin words and fancy robes. Sometimes it comes from a barefoot woman with a pouch of powdered owl bones and a twinkle in her eye. Mainstream historical fact. In the Middle Ages, folk healers were essential to everyday health care, especially in rural communities. They weren't officially sanctioned by the church or state. Most were women, and most learned through oral tradition passed down from older generations or apprenticeships. They worked with herbs, charms, and intuition. They treated births, bites, heartbreaks, and hauntings. Many were respected. Some were feared. A few were burned. You watch as the healer prepares a salve for a child's rash. It involves honey thyme, mashed apple, and a whispered blessing. She ties it in linen, hands it to the mother, and warns her, "Don't let the child sleep near cats for 3 nights." Someone asks why. She replies, "Because the rash doesn't like competition. You don't know what that means." But the mother nods, as if it's perfectly reasonable. Next up, a man with sore knees. She gives him a poultice of elderflower and crushed barley tied with red thread. Apply at dawn, never at dusk. The pain sleeps in the joints by evening. You start taking mental notes. Not because you're sick, just because this is much more interesting than leeches. And it smells better too. Fringe tidbit. Some folk remedies included boiling a black hen alive, burying its body at a crossroads, and then walking backward over the spot while reciting a rhyme. Others swore by sleeping with a knife under the pillow to ward off fever demons. There's even record of one healer using a dead mole in a sock to cure warts. She claimed it worked only if you never looked the mole in the eye. You try not to imagine how that experiment was tested. The healer now turns her attention to charms. She ties 3 fennel stalks and 1 poppy pod together with horsehair. She sings while doing it, not quite in tune, but with conviction. You ask what it's for. Night terrors, she replies. Also, rude dreams and sudden sadness. You nod, unsure whether it's a diagnosis or a warning. She then offers a blessing ritual. No cutting, no burning, just a prayer, a smudge of ash across your forehead, and a sprig of rosemary tucked behind your ear. To keep the dark out, she says, you feel vaguely better, or maybe just soothed by the smell of rosemary and the attention of someone who's seen 1,000 headaches and still believes each one is personal. Historians still argue whether these folk healers were underground scientists or social therapists. Some see them as practical chemists testing remedies by trial and error long before the scientific method existed. Others view them as emotional caretakers, giving people structure, hope, and ritual in a chaotic world. What's certain, they were everywhere. And their survival meant someone somewhere believed. Back in the square, the healer finishes her day with a warning: the moon is waxing, which means spleens are moody and you shouldn't eat raw onions. Unless you want dreams of fire, she says. You decide to skip onions tonight, just in case. That evening, as the sun slips behind the chapel roof, you sit by your hearth and smell the faint, sweet perfume of the charm in your hair. You don't feel sick. You don't feel entirely healthy either. You feel watched over, not by doctors, not by saints, but by someone who remembered your name, touched your wrist, and gave you something warm to hold. A ribbon, a root, a whisper. And that for tonight feels enough like healing. The air this morning is heavy, not with fog, but with a silence that feels intentional, like the village is holding its breath. You step outside and the streets are unusually still. Even the dogs are quiet. That's rarely a good sign. You hear it before you see it, a slow rhythmic clatter of wheels, then the sharp metallic cry of a single bell. Clang, pause, clang. A cart turns the corner drawn by a tired mule and guided by two men wearing long black robes and wide-brimmed hats. One of them is also wearing a mask shaped like a bird's beak. It's filled with herbs, but from a distance it looks more like he's preparing to rob a very specific species of raven. You don't need to ask what this is. The plague cart has returned. Mainstream historical fact. During plague outbreaks, especially the Black Death of the 14th century, carts were used to collect the bodies of the dead from homes and alleyways. In many towns, dedicated teams rang bells or called out, "Bring out your dead," as they passed. The bodies were taken to mass graves, often outside the town walls, and buried quickly to prevent further spread. The bird mask, famously worn by plague doctors, held strong-smelling herbs like lavender rose petals or vinegar-soaked sponges, believed to purify the air. Of course, we now know the plague was spread mostly by fleas and airborne bacteria, not miasma. But in the Middle Ages, the logic was simple. If it stinks, it kills. If it smells sweet, it heals. You step back into your doorway as the cart rattles by. There's no shouting today, just the sound of wheels in mud and that bell tolling like a heartbeat with a limp. The masked doctor doesn't look at anyone. He doesn't have to. People know what he's here for. A boy peeks from behind a barrel. His mother hisses and pulls him inside. A woman throws a handful of rosemary into the street, murmuring a prayer. The priest walks beside the cart, head low occasionally, lifting his hand in blessing. No words, no hymns. Even the birds are silent. Fringe, tidbit. In some towns, plague bodies were sprinkled with a mixture of powdered charcoal and crushed lily petals before burial, a ritual believed to bind the soul to quiet rest. Others wrapped bodies in red cloth to confuse death itself. One chronicler describes a man who buried his wife with 7 cloves of garlic in her mouth and a note that read, "Don't follow me yet." Medieval grief was nothing if not poetic. The cart disappears around the bend, heading toward the fields beyond the chapel wall. That's where the newest pit has been dug. They won't mark it with headstones. Maybe a wooden cross. Maybe just silence. You feel a tightness in your throat that has nothing to do with illness. You realize you haven't taken a full breath since the bell first rang. The physician, yours, the one who still smells faintly of snail poultices, arrives at your door in the late afternoon. He checks your pulse, your eyes, your tongue. He nods. "Still balanced," he says. Your bile hums softly. You blink. "That's good." He shrugs. It's not yelling. He leaves you with a sachet of angelica root to hang near your bed and instructions to boil sage in vinegar and mop the floor with it. "For peace," he adds. You don't ask if he means spiritual or bacterial peace. You assume it's both. Historians still argue whether the plague's medical response was heroic or hopeless. Some praise the physicians who risked their lives. Others note that many doctors simply fled the cities, leaving monks and midwives behind. There were treatments, sure bloodletting, purging onion plasters, but they were often more ritual than remedy. The one thing that worked, quarantine, and even that was invented out of desperation, not science. That night your dreams are strange. You float above a city made of stone and shadow. The streets are empty, but the wind carries laughter. Doors swing open and shut on their own. In one corner, a masked man plants lilies in the shape of a heart. You wake, sweating. You don't know if it was a nightmare or a message. You light a candle and place it in the window, just in case someone out there still needs light. In the morning, you find a small clay doll on your doorstep. Someone's made it from river mud and wheat husks. It wears a red thread around its waist and has a single rosemary sprig stuck into its chest. You pick it up gently. It's warm from the rising sun. You don't know what it means, but you keep it. Because maybe in this time, survival isn't just about salves and prayers. Maybe it's also about holding something, anything that reminds you you're still here. And for now, that's enough. The rains come without warning, just after the morning bread, just before the laundry is fully dry on the hedgerows. Thick, relentless rain, like the heavens forgot how to drizzle, and instead just emptied every available bucket at once. It pounds the thatched roofs. It turns the streets into soup. It soaks through tunics and underthings and into bone. You'd swear the chickens look personally offended. But worse than the wet is what comes after the rain, the smell. Everything stinks. Because in the medieval world, rain doesn't cleanse, it uncovers. And you, lucky sleeper, are about to become intimately familiar with the noble art of dealing with filth. Mainstream historical fact: medieval sanitation varied widely depending on place, wealth, and sheer luck. Many towns lacked organized sewage systems. Waste was often dumped into rivers' ditches, or even out of windows, with a polite or not shout of Gardez Low French for watch out for the water, which, spoiler, was not water. Some wealthier households had privy chambers, basically indoor latrines over cesspits, but the majority made it do with communal pits, chamber pots, or a convenient alley. You step outside and immediately regret it. Your boots vanish into muck up to the ankles. The road smells like wet hay, turnips, and something unnameable that may once have been a cat. Your neighbor is already at work with a broom made of bundled twigs, pushing what you pray is mud toward the drainage ditch. Don't breathe through your nose, she advises. You nod and immediately inhale something that smells like regret and expired eel. Fringe, tidbit. In some places, to improve street smell, people hung bunches of lavender or rosemary from their windows. In extreme cases, burning feathers was believed to purify the air, though it mostly just made everyone wheeze and feel like they were being attacked by a particularly angry goose spirit. There are also records of people sprinkling wine on their thresholds to ward off bad air and disease. Unsurprisingly, this practice was most popular among those who sold wine. You retreat back inside and resolve to remain dry and unscented. Your physician would approve. He's been ranting all week about vapors rising from wetness. According to him, a damp tunic is the express train to melancholy. He prescribes a treatment: wool undergarments, garlic soup, and silence. You're pretty sure the last part is just for his benefit. Later, you help the local midwife fetch clean water. You walk to the well, stepping carefully around puddles that may or may not be bottomless. The water is murky from runoff, so she adds a sprig of marjoram to each bucket to remind the water who it's supposed to be. You don't know if it helps, but it smells better than everything else. Historians still argue whether medieval hygiene was truly filthy by nature or simply misunderstood by modern standards. Some insist daily bathing was rare and people stank constantly. Others point to public bathhouses, recipes for homemade soaps, and a cultural emphasis on spiritual cleanliness that often included literal washing. The truth, complicated. Some people washed weekly. Some didn't. Some towns had bathhouses. Some had pits. You personally just want dry socks in a room that doesn't smell like foot stew. The bathhouse, when it opens on Sundays, is a local event. You pay a penny for lukewarm water and a wooden bench. No privacy, no bubbles, but it's warm, and someone rubs your back with a bundle of soft reeds. You emerge an hour later, feeling cleaner, sleepier, and faintly like pickled parsley. You don't care. It's glorious. At home, you light a few herbs in the hearth, sage, thyme, and something that might be clover or might be yesterday's tea. The smoke curls in soft loops. It calms the air. It smells almost holy. You sit beside it, curl your toes under the blanket, and think maybe survival isn't always about heroic battles or great wisdom. Maybe sometimes it's just knowing how to boil your socks. You sleep better that night, wrapped in layers, with rosemary on your pillow and clean feet tucked under the cat. And if the street still stinks tomorrow, well, that's tomorrow's problem. You wake to the sound of bells, not the morning kind, not the fire warning, but something oddly cheerful. They're coming from the village square, where a small crowd is already gathering. You slip on your boots, still damp from yesterday's adventure in medieval sludge, and make your way down the road. It turns out to be market day, though calling it a market might be generous. There are 5 stalls, a man selling pickled onions out of a bucket, and someone yelling about magic cheese. You stay anyway, because in the medieval world, this is the closest thing to a shopping mall, a news outlet, and a dating app, all rolled into one. Mainstream historical fact. Local markets were the backbone of everyday life in medieval villages. Most towns had at least one weekly market, and larger ones hosted annual fairs, which could attract merchants, entertainers, pilgrims, and thieves from miles around. These markets were where people bought food tools, cloth gossip, and sometimes justice, as traveling judges set up stalls beside the fishmongers. The church usually had to approve market rights, and market days were often scheduled around holy festivals, because nothing says pious devotion like bartering over cabbages after morning mass. You weave between stalls, each more chaotic than the last. A baker offers a flat loaf with mysterious herbs baked in. It's green, you observe. Exactly, he says proudly. Mint and maybe leek. No one's died yet. You take a piece. It tastes like bread with an identity crisis. At the next stall, a tanner displays rough leather belts and something he insists is a hat. It might also be a shoe. You move on. Fringe tidbit. Some sellers used coded chants or rhymes to signal what they were selling without drawing attention, especially if the goods were not entirely legal. One popular chant went, "Fine buttons and flax for love or for tax," which loosely translated to, "Do you want lace garters or stolen church wine?" You hear one such chant and watch a monk immediately start sneezing. You take that as a sign and step away. Children run between the legs of goats and carts. One is carrying a wooden puppet that looks disturbingly like the village priest. No one stops her. You hear a woman bartering for wool using a song instead of coins. The shepherd shrugs and nods. You suppose that counts. Someone drops a jug of vinegar and a chorus of curses erupts, followed by laughter and a very helpful chicken that starts pecking at the spill. This is medieval commerce at its best. Near the edge of the market, a traveling storyteller has set up on a barrel. He's missing 3 teeth, but has the kind of voice that could command a ship or seduce a bishop. He begins a tale about a knight who defeats a dragon with an eel pie and a lute. You stay. So does half the village. Nobody cares how it ends. They just want the rhythm, the rhyme, the chance to forget just for a little while that outside this muddy square, the world is sharp and short and full of cold mornings. Historians still argue whether medieval markets were social equalizers or subtle power displays. Some say they allowed peasants to engage in commerce alongside nobles. Others point out that stall placement tax rates and church oversight made sure everyone knew their place. Either way, markets were the heart of medieval public life. Loud, messy, risky, but utterly essential. You think about that as you watch a nobleman argue with a fishwife over the price of smoked herring. The fishwife wins. You make a mental note not to cross her. You buy a small clay cup carved with symbols you don't recognize. What do they mean, you ask? The vendor winks. Protection from deceit. Or bees. Depends on how you use it. You take it home anyway. You're not planning to lie or fight bees, but you never know. That night, as the fire crackles low, you sip from the cup. The drink inside is just warm barley water, but somehow it tastes better, like it remembers being bought in a place full of noise and hope, and the occasional goat scream. You smile. In a world where storms bring disease and comets bring panic, sometimes market day is the only real magic you get. And tonight, that's more than enough. There's something in the air tonight, not just the thick wood smoke or the faint scent of onions lingering from supper. It's quieter than usual, still, like the village is bracing for something unseen. The dogs aren't barking. The chickens haven't squawked in hours. You hear the distant clack of hooves on stone, then a voice, soft and sing-song. Turn your eye from mirrored glass. You freeze. So does everyone else. Because that rhyme belongs to only one group, the mourners. And tonight, they're walking again. Mainstream historical fact. Mourning rituals in medieval Europe were deeply influenced by both Christian doctrine and local customs. When someone died, their body was often washed, dressed, and laid out at home for viewing. Prayers would be said sometimes non-stop for several days. Wealthier families might hire professional mourners, individuals, often women, paid to weep loudly, chant laments, or recite the deceased's virtues in public. These rituals helped both mark the person's passage and reinforce social roles of grief and remembrance. You press yourself against the cottage wall as a small procession rounds the bend. 4 men carry a litter, just a plank with ropes and a coarse cloth, but their steps are solemn. Behind them, 3 women in gray shawls walk with heads bowed, each one murmuring a line from the same endless chant. Their words curl through the night like threads of smoke. The dead man, from what you can tell, was not rich, but he has people to mourn him. In this time, that is its own kind of wealth. Fringe tidbit. In some regions, it was believed that the soul lingered for 3 days, unsure of its fate. To help guide it, families placed coins over the eyes. Mirrors were turned to the wall so the soul wouldn't get trapped, and bread was left outside the door so death might be tempted by a snack and forget someone inside. Some also placed knives beneath the bed to cut the ties of pain between the spirit and its body. It's unclear if it helped, but it certainly made cleaning up more exciting. You follow the procession from a distance, your steps slow and soft. No one talks. No one needs to. This is a ritual older than language. The path leads to the edge of the village where a humble plot of land serves as the burial ground. The priest stands waiting with a candle, the flame nearly snuffed by the breeze. He reads a passage, not in Latin, but in the local tongue. It's simple, kind, earthy. You like him for that. The mourners sing one last verse. Their voices crack not from sorrow, but from repetition. These women do this every week, sometimes more. They cry on behalf of those who cannot. They carry grief like a profession. But when one of them catches your eye just for a moment, you realize she's not entirely performing. Because in a world where life is cheap and death is busy, every loss is also a mirror. It might be your brother next, your child, or you. Historians still argue whether public mourning was meant more for communal healing or control. Some suggest these rituals gave people space to process grief in a structured way. Others believe they served as tools for reinforcing religious obedience, a constant reminder that death was watching and salvation required conformity. You lean toward the former, because tonight nothing feels more human than the ache in the air. After the burial, the mourners return to the village, their chant fading into silence. You stay a while longer, staring at the fresh mound of earth. There's no headstone, just a small wooden marker. You read the name. You didn't know him well, but you say it out loud anyway, because even now, centuries before social media, saying someone's name keeps them alive, if only for a few seconds more. Back home, you light a candle and place it in the window. Not for him, necessarily. For everyone. For anyone. And for yourself. Because in the quiet hours of a medieval night, it helps to remember you're not the only one still awake. You wrap yourself in a blanket, listen to the slow breathing of your neighbors through the thin walls, and let the warmth of ritual, not answers, cradle you to sleep. You wake before dawn, not because of a rooster or the usual creak of the baker's door, but because something strange is happening in the sky. You throw on your cloak, grab a hunk of cold bread, and step into the blue darkness. Everyone else is outside too, heads tilted back, mouths slightly open. Even old Marta, who hasn't left her hearth since the last solar eclipse, is staring up. Because floating above the fields, just barely visible, is a comet. And in the medieval world, that means only one thing. Doom is coming. Mainstream historical fact. In the Middle Ages, comets were not viewed as celestial wonders. They were omens, harbingers of disaster, war plague, or the death of kings. The appearance of a comet could spark panic ritual or sudden policy changes. For example, Halley's Comet in 1066 was famously seen as a divine signal just before the Norman conquest of England. Chroniclers recorded it with terror and awe. A long-haired star appeared in the sky, portending great calamity. Medieval astronomy was deeply entangled with astrology. If it blazed across a particular constellation, it meant doom for that associated kingdom or ruler. No pressure. Whose star is it? Someone whispers. That's the question on everyone's mind. Is it for the king, the bishop, your cousin, who just bought a suspiciously large cow? No one knows, and that's what makes it terrifying. Fringe tidbit. To counteract a comet's curse, some villagers would ring church bells backwards, burn animal dung on rooftops, or whip effigies of the sky, usually scarecrows with star-covered tunics. One English town even held a mock trial for the comet, accusing it of treason and a hateful stare. The trial ended when a storm blew the scaffold down. The villagers considered that a hung jury. Tonight, your village settles for fasting, kneeling, and someone trying to light incense that turns out to be dried cabbage. A noble effort. You stare up and realize it's beautiful. The tail stretches like a ribbon across the blackness, shimmering faintly in the early sky. It doesn't blink or move. It just watches. You feel very small, not in a bad way, more like an ant discovering the concept of opera. But you also feel seen, and not in a good way, like whatever's out there knows your name, your birth year, and your deepest fear, which is probably running out of garlic during flu season. A monk beside you murmurs calculations into his sleeve. He's trying to determine the comet's trajectory using parchment, 3 beans, and a stick. You suspect the math is more poetic than accurate, but he seems satisfied. 6 weeks, he whispers, until the storm. He doesn't explain, no one asks him to. Because when comets arrive, you don't argue with math or monks. Historians still argue whether comet panic was fueled more by church sermons or collective trauma. Some suggest that because disasters were so common, famines, wars, plagues, people just needed an explanation. Others point to preserved homilies, blaming comets on immodest dress, excessive wine, and heretical dancing. Yes, apparently, even the stars judged your sock height. The sky lightens, and the comet fades. The village exhales, not relief, more like a pause. Because the danger hasn't passed, it's just not visible anymore. And that's somehow worse. You return home and spend the morning stuffing wild garlic into every crack in your cottage. You hang a mirror facing outward to reflect any sky-born evil and mutter a few protection charms just in case. One involves singing the alphabet backward in Latin. You do it twice. Can't hurt. At midday, the priest hosts a prayer for protection from celestial wrath. Half the town shows up. The other half is at home boiling lentils and repenting for stealing firewood last winter. You do both. That night, the comet is gone, but you still look for it. Part of you wants it to return, if only to have something clear to fear. You sleep with one hand on your rosary and the other on your garlic bundle, just in case. Because in this world, you never know what's coming from the sky next. By midweek, the comets vanished from memory faster than last year's goat tax scandal. People have stopped staring at the sky and returned to the comforting rhythms of earth baking, sewing, gossiping, and tripping over chickens in narrow alleys. But for you, the fear hasn't completely settled. You're watching things a little more closely. People are acting odd. A neighbor offers you apples without asking for bread in return. The priest blesses your dog. The baker gives you a bun for free with raisins. Something's coming. You can feel it. And it arrives in the most terrifying form of all, a messenger from the castle. Mainstream historical fact. In the feudal system, most people lived under the authority of a local lord or baron, who in turn answered to a duke or a king. Communication between peasants and royalty was rare, but when it happened, it was a big deal. Messengers clad in colors bearing the noble house's sigil were often feared rather than welcomed. They rarely brought good news. More often, new taxes, calls to war, or enforcement of some obscure decree banning left-handed butter churning On feast days, the man rides into town on a dusty gray horse with a mane like unbaked dough. His tabard bears the symbol of your liege lord, a red boar on gold. He does not smile. Everyone gathers. Even the innkeeper's cat shows up, although it immediately regrets it and vanishes into a barrel. The messenger unrolls a scroll, clears his throat, and begins. By decree of Lord Godfrey, son of Hugh, the sullen heir to the lands of Middlecombe, all able-bodied persons are to report to the village green at sun's end tomorrow for an accounting of grain and good character, by order of crown and divine favor. There is a long stunned silence. Then someone sneezes. Fringe tidbit. In some parts of medieval Europe, accountings of good character meant villagers had to publicly vouch for one another in front of a clerk or noble. This often devolved into petty grudges or weird compliments like, well, he only stole cheese once, or she hasn't cursed the moon in over a year. It was as much a popularity contest as a moral audit. You return home in a fog of anxiety. You've done nothing wrong, except possibly oversalt the neighbor's soup once. But what does good character mean when no one writes the rules down? That night you clean your tunic, polish your boots with onion skin, a trick you learned from the tailor's apprentice, and rehearse not looking suspicious. You fail repeatedly. Historians still argue whether these visits from above were genuine efforts at governance or just theatrical performances of control. Some suggest they were used to remind villages of their subservience. Others argue they served a real bureaucratic purpose, tracking population, collecting tribute, and rooting out those pesky heretics. What's clear is this: when the messenger comes, you show up, even if your only heresy is forgetting to bow at the church bell. The next day, the green is full. Everyone's dressed slightly better than usual, but no one makes eye contact. The clerk beside the messenger has a quill, a book, and the cold, efficient look of someone who genuinely enjoys spelling names wrong. You are called third. Name, you tell him. Occupation. You try to say assistant to the herb woman, but he writes wandering apothecary, which somehow sounds worse. Any disputes, debts, or dishonors? You open your mouth, close it, shake your head. He stares for a moment, then scribbles something that might be a frown or just very aggressive ink. You are dismissed. Afterward, everyone pretends they weren't terrified. Kids throw stones at a log. The smith starts whistling. The baker sells stale buns with extra smugness. But you're still tense, watching the clerk's book like it's a snake. It doesn't bite, but it remembers. You walk home slower than usual, feeling like a rabbit in a field full of hawks. At your door, you find a small bundle. Rosemary, a coin, and a sprig of yarrow. A neighbor's protection charm. You clutch it like a prayer and step inside. Because in this world, character is judged by everyone, but protected by neighbors. You wake the next morning to the smell of something burning. Not your roof, thankfully. It's incense, thick, smoky, bitter, wafting from the church as the village prepares for All Souls Day. The bells ring slow and low, not the joyful peals of feast days, but a kind of audible sigh. You dress in dark wool brush ashes from your sleeves and join the quiet procession already forming in the square. Today is not a day for work. Today is for remembering the dead and trying very hard not to join them. Mainstream historical fact: All Souls Day, observed on November 2nd, was a key part of the medieval Christian calendar. It was dedicated to praying for the souls in purgatory, those not yet in heaven, but not condemned to hell either. The belief was that prayers, masses, and acts of charity could shorten a soul's time in suffering, helping them move on to paradise. This day followed All Saints' Day for the holy dead, but All Souls was for everyone else. Your mother, your brother, your friend, who drank mead from a stolen chalice once, but was very sorry about it. People lit candles in windows, gave out soul cakes to beggars in exchange for prayers, and rang death knell bells all day. The air feels different, not just cold, but full, like every breath contains a name you forgot to say out loud. Children walk silently for once, each carrying a small candle. One boy clutches a wooden carving of his grandfather and mutters something about cabbage, a tribute, perhaps. The priest leads the procession. He's wearing his best black vestments, embroidered with white thread in the shape of wheat and thorns. You wonder what the thread cost, and then wonder what it's meant to ward off. Fringe tidbit. In parts of medieval England and France, it was believed that the souls of the dead returned on All Souls' Night to visit their old homes. To appease them, villagers would leave out small loaves of bread, cups of ale, or even warm coals in the hearth. Failing to do so might invite bad dreams, or worse, the scent of death lingering in your linens. Some families would even crack a window so the souls could enter without knocking. Because the last thing you want is a ghost knocking politely. At the cemetery, everyone gathers around the oldest grave, the anchor stone as some call it. It belonged to the first priest in the village, or maybe a knight, or possibly a baker with very loyal sons. No one agrees. But it doesn't matter. It's where the prayers always begin. You watch as names are spoken into the air one by one. Some you know. Others you've only heard whispered over stew or in bedtime warnings. You add your own, quietly. Just your father's name and your sister's, and the dog who used to steal laundry but always brought it back. A silence falls like frost, not cold exactly, but absolute. The priest holds up his hand, and in that moment, every eye lifts. Not in fear this time, but in shared memory. Because today is the one day everyone agrees on something. The dead still matter. Historians still argue whether All Souls' Day was more a theological event or a cultural necessity. Some claim it was a way for the church to assert control over the concept of grief, organizing it into a neat ritual. Others believe it allowed for communal catharsis, giving peasants and nobles alike one sanctioned day to mourn, to weep, and to hope. But maybe it was both. Or maybe, like everything else, it depended on who remembered you. After the ceremony, the villagers return home quietly. Some go back to chores. Others sit with tea and stare at nothing in particular. One woman hangs rosemary on her door. Another burns sage over her laundry. You find yourself lighting a candle without really meaning to. You place it near the window, where it glows soft and golden against the gloom. Then, without thinking, you whisper the names again, just to be sure they heard you the first time. That night the village is silent again, but not empty. You feel it in the way the wind doesn't quite move right. You hear it in the soft creak of your floorboards, even though no one's walking. And when you wake briefly, just past midnight, you find the candles still burning, and just maybe a little warmth in the air beside it. You don't question it, not tonight. You pull your blanket up, press your hands together, and let memory be the lullaby. Because the dead may be gone, but in this world, they still answer when called. The sky this morning is a hazy pewter gray, neither storm nor sun, just the kind of weather that makes your knees ache and the bread take twice as long to rise. You bundle yourself in a scratchy wool shawl and step outside where the village is unusually quiet. Even the dogs seem contemplative. You know what day it is. The pilgrimage is about to begin, and this time you're going. Mainstream historical fact. Pilgrimage in medieval Europe wasn't just for the ultra-devout or the wealthy. Ordinary people, peasants, craftsmen, even children, undertook long, dangerous journeys to holy sites in search of healing forgiveness, or simply to earn spiritual merit. These sites included places like Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela, or even local shrines known for housing a saint's toenail or a miraculously preserved loaf of bread. To be a pilgrim was to temporarily step outside of normal life and enter a kind of sacred liminality, neither here nor homebody, on the road soul, in a kind of hopeful suspension. Your village priest has organized a small group this year, 6 men, 4 women, and you. The goal is a chapel 3 towns over, built on the site of a dream someone once had about an angel baking pies. It's not exactly Canterbury, but hey, it's closer, and rumor has it the spring water there glows slightly at dusk. You carry what you can: bread, a wool blanket, a flask of dried rosemary, and a small carved charm shaped like a hare. You don't know why you bring the hare. It just feels right. Fringe tidbit. Many pilgrims wore special badges or symbols to mark themselves on the journey. These ranged from seashells for those heading to Santiago to wooden fish or pewter saints' faces. They weren't just souvenirs, they were spiritual armor said to protect the wearer from illness thieves and even werewolves. Yes, werewolves. Don't look so surprised. One 13th century French text even includes a guide on how to politely greet one should your paths cross. Spoiler offer: salted meat. not eye contact. The road is longer than expected. It always is. You pass rows of skeletal trees, their branches like old hands reaching for sky. Fields lie fallow. Smoke curls from cottages whose names you don't know. Once you spot a man by a stream, carving a cross into a fish and whispering to it. You don't ask. You just walk. The rhythm becomes prayer. Nights on the road are cold and strange. Your group huddles beneath thin tents, telling stories, half whispered, half true. One woman claims the shrine you're headed to healed her cousin's sheep of madness. Another insists she once saw the Virgin's face in her stew. The priest gently suggests it was probably a turnip. No one sleeps well. But somehow, morning always comes. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrimages were genuinely transformative or simply an early form of spiritual tourism. Some argue the physical hardships and religious rituals created lasting internal change. Others point to pilgrim frauds inns that sold fake relics and shrines that quietly charged entrance fees, arguing it was all more economy than ecstasy. Still, for many, the journey was as important as the destination, a place to ask questions without needing answers. Finally, on the third day, you see it, a small stone chapel perched beside a shimmering spring. Pilgrims kneel in the dirt outside, murmuring prayers and tossing coins into the water. One woman sobs, another laughs. You just stand still, because somehow, against all odds, you made it. You light a candle inside. It flickers once, then steadies. You whisper the same names you said on All Souls Day, plus one more your own. You drink from the spring. It tastes like silver in time and something older than language. You leave behind your hair charm, placing it gently on the stone altar. You don't need it anymore, at least not right now. That night, you sleep on the floor of the chapel beside the fire, shoulder to shoulder with strangers. No one snores, no one speaks. And in the soft, crackling dark, you realize something. The real miracle isn't the shrine or the glowing water or even the healed sheep. It's that you went searching, and the world let you return a little less heavy. You return home to find your village unchanged, but also not. Maybe it's you. The path seems smaller, the sky more familiar. The baker winks at you, the dogs bark in the same order. But something in your step feels lighter, like you left a stone behind somewhere between the spring and that field with the oddly polite werewolf rumors. There's no time to reflect, though, because as you reach your door, the bell begins to toll slow, then faster, then frantic. The fire watch is ringing the plague bell. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, plague was not just the Black Death of 1347, 1351. Outbreaks of pestilence, whether bubonic, pneumonic, or undiagnosed, struck with regularity. Entire towns could be decimated. Villagers often rang church bells as both a call to prayer and a kind of sonic quarantine warning others to stay away. Doctors, such as they were, had little to offer. Remedies ranged from bleeding and burning aromatic herbs to carrying sweet-smelling flowers in one's nose, the source of the ring around the rosy rhyme, some say. The priest stands at the chapel steps, white-faced and shouting instructions. You're told not to enter others' homes, to boil water, to sleep near open windows. The herb woman begins laying bundles of dried wormwood and sage at every doorstep. You help. You always do, even when afraid. Fringe tidbit. In some towns, it was believed the plague was a demonic mist, and villagers would walk around swinging swords in the air, trying to cut the sickness away. Others made loud noises, banging pans, shouting chants to scare off the invisible force. In one bizarre case, monks in Italy staged a mock trial for death itself, reading a list of charges and sentencing him to exile. The plague did not attend the trial. Rude, you return home and immediately burn your travel clothes, just in case. You rub vinegar on your hands and wipe the floor with the thyme water. It smells sharp, like fear, dressed in herbs. The house creaks differently tonight. Every cough you hear outside makes your chest tighten. You pray softly. You do not know to whom. Over the next few days, life becomes a rhythm of fear and caution. People speak through shutters. Bread is left at doors in silence. Someone begins writing the names of the sick on the chapel wall in charcoal. You don't go to look. Not yet. Historians still argue whether village-level plague responses were driven more by superstition or survival logic, while many actions seem strange now. Things like isolation, burning infected linens, and avoiding crowds did have a real protective effect, but beliefs in plague demons, planetary misalignment, or punishment for sin also shaped behavior. In short, it was both a medical crisis and a spiritual one, and no one had a clear answer. Then one night the bell rings again, not fast, just once. A slow, low note that means someone has passed. You don't ask who. You don't want to know. Instead, you mix rosemary with lard and smear it across the door frame. Another charm. Another line between life and whatever waits on the other side. You sleep lightly, waking to every creak, and just before dawn, you dream of the spring water again. Still, silver. You drink from it. Then you wake, sweating, heart pounding, but strangely calm. You rise and boil water. You leave a loaf of bread at your neighbor's door. You step out into the morning fog and breathe slow and steady, because sometimes all you can do is keep moving, even when the world seems to be holding its breath. By the fifth day, the bell doesn't ring, not because the plague is gone, but because the bell ringer is sick. You learn this from the baker's son, who shouts it from the edge of the chapel green, clutching a loaf under one arm and looking like he might cry or throw up or both. The village has entered the most terrifying phase of all the waiting. You've done all the things. Burned herbs, boiled water, slept sitting up, whispered protection charms into your porridge, but now the air feels heavy, like it knows something you don't. There's nothing left to do but survive and hope your neighbors do too. Mainstream historical fact. During plague, outbreaks, medieval villages often sealed themselves off either by choice or by decree. Some built temporary fences or dug trenches at the borders. Others posted warnings scratched onto trees or scrawled on bits of wood. Pest is here. Go back. If someone tried to leave, they might be turned back with spears or just locked out for good. Survival often depended on brutal isolation. Your village hasn't built a fence, but you hear talk, whispers of blocking the road from the next town, of refusing travelers, even if they're family. The idea makes your stomach twist. Your cousin lives just over that hill. She was going to visit next week. You don't want to imagine turning her away. You also don't want to imagine her bringing death in her pockets. The priest gathers the healthy on the green. No sermon today, just orders. Stay apart. Tend your own. If you must speak, speak across water. He doesn't explain that last one. But that evening, someone builds a small wooden table over the stream that cuts through the village. 2 buckets rest on either side. You watch as people begin to trade goods across it like prisoners in a storybook castle. Bread for herbs, a comb for a spool of thread. No one touches. No one lingers. You leave a sprig of lavender and pick up a pinch of salt. It feels like magic, or math, or maybe just hope arranged carefully on a plank of wood. Fringe tidbit. In parts of the Low Countries, villagers, during outbreaks, would pass notes and items by floating them down canals in sealed jars or little wooden boats. One 14th century record describes a couple who courted this way for months, sending each other poetry inside walnut shells, tied with red thread. They eventually married. The plague killed half their guests. The other half danced anyway. At night, the silence becomes unbearable. No bells, no gossip. Even the owls seem cautious. You sit near the hearth, sipping boiled nettle tea, watching the flames chase shadows across the walls. You try not to think about the list on the chapel wall. You fail. You dream again this time, not of springs or candles, but of the plague itself. Except in your dream, it's a woman, dressed in gray, carrying a broom and walking door to door with infinite patience. She doesn't knock. She just waits. And when you wake, you find rosemary scattered on the floor where it shouldn't be. You do not remember putting it there, but you leave it. Historians still argue whether dreams during plagues were seen as omens, divine messages, or mere fever hallucinations. Some chroniclers took them seriously, recording entire dream sequences as evidence of coming miracles or doom. Others dismissed them, blaming stale bread night air or the devil tickling your brain. But one thing is agreed during plague times: dreams felt louder because the world was so quiet. You spend the next day baking, just baking. You knead dough like it insulted your mother. You braid it into shapes. You burn the first batch and almost cry. The second batch is perfect, golden, and soft. You leave loaves at 2 doorsteps. You don't know if the people inside are well. You just hope they still remember the taste of bread. That evening, just before sleep, you walk to the stream. Someone has left a carved charm, a tiny wooden crow. You don't touch it, but you smile. Because someone out there is still carving, still creating, still choosing beauty in a world that feels like it's shrinking by the hour. You walk home slowly, and as the wind picks up, you swear you hear it, not the bell, not the chant of death, but something softer, someone humming, a song you forgot you knew. Morning arrives not with the usual gray hush, but with sunlight, real sunlight, the kind that slants through your shutters and lands on the floor like a silk ribbon. You blink into it, dazed, like someone opening their eyes underwater. There's warmth on your cheek. Birds are singing, actual birds. You sit up slowly, half expecting to cough, to feel fever behind your eyes, to find the world has turned to ash. But no, you're here, still breathing. And so apparently is the village. Mainstream historical fact. After a plague wave passed, survivors often spoke of a kind of silent miracle, an eerie realization that they'd made it through while others had not. These moments were not always joyful. The feeling was more commonly described in medieval accounts as uneasy gratitude or a heaviness in the chest. They were still surrounded by loss, but the sun still rose, and life astonishingly resumed. You step outside and see a neighbor doing the same. You don't wave, just nod. That's enough. The stream table is still in place, but someone's added flowers, clumsy daffodils tied with twine. There's a crust of bread in the bucket, 2 apples, a folded scrap of parchment with a badly drawn smiley face. You laugh, a real laugh, which feels like a small rebellion against fear. You wander toward the chapel. The door is open, and the list of names is there, but no new ones added. For the first time in days, no one has died. The priest is inside lighting candles. His hands shake slightly. You don't disturb him. You just sit. Let the quiet settle into your bones. Let the ache of endurance unclench. You made it. Fringe tidbit. In parts of Germany, it was believed that if you rubbed your home's door frame with garlic and survived the plague, you should bury the garlic as a thank offering. In other places, survivors made votive offerings of bread milk or tiny carved animals, symbols of what they cherished most. One village even threw a party for their goats. They didn't get sick. One account reads, and the cheese was excellent. That night, the village gathers not to mourn, but to breathe together. No feast, no dancing, just people sitting on the green watching the stars blink awake. Someone brings a jug of wine. Someone else starts a quiet song. You hum along even though you don't know the words, because the melody feels like a memory you didn't know you had. The wind is warm. Children chase each other again, barefoot and muddy. The old woman who burned sage now gives out honey cakes. The blacksmith says nothing at all, just keeps wiping his eyes on his apron. You bake again, not out of fear this time, but because someone asked if you would. You deliver the loaves without knocking, but now you hear footsteps coming to the door, voices saying thank you. The silence has broken. Historians still argue how much the plague truly changed medieval society. Some believe it upended the feudal system, creating labor shortages that gave peasants more power. Others argue the world simply adjusted, absorbed the shock, and marched on as always. But one truth remains clear. For those who lived through it, survival was a transformation, not always visible, but always there. Later, you find the old hair charm you left at the shrine sitting neatly on your doorstep. No note, no footprints, just the charm a little smoother from travel, its ears still lopsided. You pick it up, hold it in your hand, and smile. It came back. So apparently, did you? And now you sit by the window, candle flickering, bell quiet, and you breathe, not fast, not slow, just enough, because you are part of the memory now, of the names not written on the chapel wall, of the loaf passed over water, of the song hummed at twilight, of the long winter that did not take you. Not this time. Not yet. The night is quiet now, and the fires have burned low. Your village sleeps wrapped in wool and dreams and the soft relief of surviving. Even the trees seem still their branches, swaying less like warning and more like lullaby. The stream hums its old tune, and the stars, those same patient witnesses to every hope and every fear, blink quietly above it all. You sit in the dark, your hands folded around, nothing in particular. The hearth has gone cold, but you don't mind. There's warmth enough in the memory of candles, and the rhythm of breath, and the nearness of others, even if only in stories. You remember the faces, the bread, the song, the carved crow, the dream of the plague woman walking door to door. You survived, not because of a charm or the priest's chant, or even the garlic-rubbed door frame, but because you kept showing up, kept waking up, kept baking, walking, humming, grieving, giving, hoping. And tomorrow you will again. Or maybe not tomorrow. Maybe just whenever you're ready. So for now, let your shoulders sink into the earth beneath your blanket. Let your breath settle like dusk over a quiet chapel. Let go of the names just for a little while. They will still be there in the morning. The candlelight will hold them. The stream will carry them. And your dreams, those half-woven echoes, will return them to you, gently like driftwood, finding shore. Sleep now. There's nothing left to fear.